This is the Constructionist Podcast, where we take ancient stories, the person of Jesus, current events and topics, and help you construct a new Christian worldview that's relevant and loving to those around you. I'm your host, Kevin Bates. I'm a semiotician and community builder, looking at the signs of the times to build a better future together. Well, good evening, everybody. You are tuned in to the Constructionist Podcast, and tonight we are starting with a topic that is our basic existence. So we desire for you to navigate with us through a framework of what we'll call a worldview. That worldview, of course, we desire to be relevant and loving to people. So this idea has been emerging for a while for us over the last handful of weeks. We've taken a break from our podcast, which thank you for giving us that time just to rethink what we're doing and how we're doing it. And of course, we saw Rob in the little screen right in the bottom left corner. Rob does a great job in the behind the scenes. He's our tech person. So every once in a while, he ends up on the screen. But that is Rob, and I'm joined with Sharia and Jake, two of my associates. And over the last handful of weeks, we have been emerging this topic inside of us when it comes to Christianity, construction, deconstruction, and what it all means. So a lot of times we get trapped in deconstruction. We get trapped in the deconstruction mode where we don't like something, so we then begin to pull it apart or deconstruct it. We hate on it a little bit. And when you hate on something long enough and we spend enough time hating on something, a lot of times we don't end up constructing anything. We just end up, our practice is to hate on that thing. So constructionism is putting the building blocks back together. So we are in the constructing question, where we are asking, what does it mean to construct, and what does constructionism look like versus just deconstruction? I think deconstruction is important when it comes to values, faith, ethics, morality, everything. We need to deconstruct things in order to construct new things. And sometimes, though, our rebellion of old ways, which is important in some cases, but our rebellion in old ways or old theologies or old thinking can just perpetuate a new set of toxic values. So if we don't know where we're going, we're going to end up probably just being exactly the same. There's going to be no growth if we don't have a goal or a target that we're growing through. So in counseling and all of my counseling that I've done, there's been a growth point where we're here and we need to get here. We have a vision in mind of where we want to end up to. We explore through those things. We feel through that. And that's all about constructing. And along the way, sometimes we need to deconstruct in order to construct. So we need a framework. We need a framework of construction. And so we are adopting tonight and reclaiming, we'll call it a reclamation. We are reclaiming the idea of a worldview. Some of you have heard that topic before, worldview. So you're familiar with that. That's just going to give us a language to the framework. We're not going to necessarily define it as something that you might have known in the past, but it's going to define what we're doing, and we're going to redefine the idea of worldview. So that framework is going to include lots of topics that I am excited to present along with Sharia and Jake on these evenings. That framework includes topics on just being human. What does it mean to be human? It includes topics of ethics and hospitality and loving our neighbor, something that we were in our pre-work discussing. It's like, are we really going to love our neighbor, or is that just a false promise? Identity, theology, eschatology. Where in the world are we going? Is there an afterlife? Is there something after death? Ontology, the study of just being and on being. The human consciousness, and is that really power? Do we have power in our human consciousness? Can we existentially direct our human consciousness to another person across the world? Do our prayers actually work? When we direct our human consciousness into positive thoughts in the universe, what does that actually mean? So, we're going to discuss human consciousness, existentialism, nihilism, knowledge, and tacit knowledge. It includes topics like such things. So, knowledge and tacit knowledge, the things that we're just born with that we know. Fire is hot. We don't need to get burned by fire in order for it to know that it's hot. We just know it's hot. Maybe that's a tacit knowledge you have. Personal methodology, personal praxis. And this is going to be one of my favorite topics that we'll probably spend the rest of our lives on is this: the honest reality of the world around us. An honest reality of the world around us. I think we're trapped now in politics and culture that we just do not have an honest reality of the world around us. We have an anti-reality or an anti-version of reality, but maybe we need to rethink what reality really is. So our goal is to develop a framework, a worldview, develop our personal views together. And we're not going to depend on a news channel to do that for us, right? No news channel anchor is going to develop our worldview. No rock star pastor is going to develop our worldview. They're not going to do that for us. We have all the tools inside of us, all the tools within our resources or relationships around us to develop such things, is to lean on those things, to depend on those things. We can do this together. So you have heard, maybe you have heard of the term biblical worldview. Maybe you've heard that before. Maybe you've just heard the term Christian worldview, religious worldview, or maybe just worldview in general. We're going to unpack all that tonight. There's a lot of definitions around those things. There's lots of meaning around those things. It means different things to different people. It means different things to different cultures across the world. What is a biblical Christian worldview? If we can answer what does that mean, if we can answer what a biblical Christian worldview actually means, then we can put together a framework to maybe develop it and look at the differences of what we believe. So those of you who listen through these weeks, our hope is that through our time together, that we will begin to create space to think. We will create space to carve out and develop and maybe emerge out of these discussions with a new Christ, Jesus worldview, something that maybe matches the early church or maybe matches a biblical worldview more than what's being promoted as a biblical worldview. So if you are listening to us tonight, you are our supporters, and we are thankful for that. We're thankful that you join us each and every week. And so the most important way that you can support us is to listen and to interact with us. So every Thursday night, now at 8 o'clock, we've moved our night at 8 p.m., we are going to be on some social media channel that you can access. So whatever social media channel you listen to, you can interact with that social media channel, and we will answer live those questions. Or you can just listen to this over and over and over again and support us that way too. And through the week, we'll look for those chat bombs, and we will definitely try to answer all of your questions. You can financially support us by going into the chat box underneath on Facebook Live or in our show notes on YouTube. There will be a link to our website platform that you can give online at resonatelife.org. So those are the two ways that you can support us. All right, I'm very excited to be with you tonight, and we're going to get into the main ideas and the reason why we are discussing these things. And so, are we good with our tech?
No.
No.
Looks pixelated, but things
Hold on,
sound
we're
right for
frozen.
me now.
Okay. Let's take a pause for a moment.
Frozen.
Possibly good.
Rob, what Wi-Fi are you on?
Symposium guest.
Great.
Okay, I think we're a little bit better now. Not sure why, but we sometimes have tech issues. So let's get into the main body of our material. Even if it's jumpy and even if it's pixelated, hopefully people can still listen to what we're talking about. All right. So a while back, I kept seeing some postings. And in those postings, George Barna was reporting that only a certain number of pastors were or adhered to what he called a biblical worldview. So those percentages went like this: 41% of senior teaching type pastors had a biblical worldview, 28% associate type pastors had a biblical worldview, 12% of youth children type pastors had a biblical worldview. So these percentages were hailed across the internet as Christianity is moving into a dark place. Christianity was basically moving into the dark ages of faith, and the sky is falling, proof that Christianity was we were off base, we were off track. And I watched a lot of conservative right-leaning pastors, I'll just call it out, that double down on some of their mantras during this time. When those statistics came out, now was the time to tighten the belt. Now was the time to double down on, I guess, conservative values and what I'll call tight-lipped versions of scripture, where there was no allowances or no room for interpretation or different ideas, views, or beliefs about scripture. Well, this bothered me. It bothered me a lot because I have different views of scripture than some of my pastors and my colleagues that I have around. Even the three of us have different views of scripture. And you will notice that as we go along. And so I don't necessarily hold to a set of principles that maybe some of my colleagues from other states hold to. And so to say that one of us doesn't hold a biblical worldview, that's pretty audacious to say. I think that that's maybe judgmental and not necessarily where we need to be. So I had a problem with that. I started trying to look for what the definition of a biblical worldview was. If George Barna was going to call us out and say that I didn't hold a biblical worldview, or Sharia didn't hold a biblical worldview, or I did and Sharia didn't, why don't we define that a little bit? And to find that information on the internet was very difficult. It was difficult to find where a solid universal definition of a biblical worldview was. So we finally found the document, George Barna's material on what he believed a biblical worldview was. So we have that document with us tonight. And that started me on this journey of discovery of what is a worldview and what is a biblical worldview. So over the next 7 weeks, we are going to cover the topic of the biblical worldview, or the Christian worldview. So tonight is our introduction. Next week, we're going to talk about a real honest view of the world. I don't necessarily believe that everybody doesn't necessarily have a honest view of the world. Following that, we're going to talk about where we are headed and the afterlife, so eschatology. And is there a heaven or hell? I have a different version of hell than most of my colleagues. So we're going to talk about this. And you know what's funny is I have these texts coming across my computer right now, so I got a little distracted there. Probably need to turn those off during our broadcast. But some of those is, I think the goal of every Thursday night is to get fired.
Well, stuff from back when I was teaching, so
Yeah, exactly.
you're right
So
back there.
this guy cannot be hired anywhere. I mean, these
Barna?
people can't. No, us.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, oops. So we're going to talk about heaven and hell, and we're going to talk about the differences of hell. Hell is one of those topics that if you talk about hell, man, you are up on the chopping block if you're a minister, pastor of some kind, and you start talking about a different version of hell. For some reason, people have guilt and shame around hell, that hell needs to be real and exist and be like that place that we send those sinners to. And if you don't have that, the same fiery furnace, literal place of hell that I do, then you're walking on thin ice right to hell. Okay, so we're going to talk about heaven and hell and eschatology. Then a topic that I'm really going to get into is, what would Jesus really do? Really? What would Jesus really do? That's our practice. That's our methodology of life. Then in the 5th week, we're going to talk about how we attain these goals. What's our praxis of life, followed then by what is truth, what is falsehood, what is real truth? Are there absolute truths? How do we determine truth? That's the epistemology theory of knowledge, and how basically tacit knowledge fits into all of that. And then we're going to put some building blocks together of construction and look at the origin and the basis of our worldview. So that's the outline of the next 7 weeks. I'm very excited for that. And these are actually based off of an atheist philosopher named Leo Apostol. And Leo Apostol, I think Dutch, or yeah, I'd have to look that up again, what country he was from. But he is an atheist philosopher that came up with the structure of worldviews that we're going to use. And I want to use a perceived atheist, and then in parallel, in tandem, what do Christians believe a worldview is in comparison to what an atheist believes a worldview is? Very different and similar at the same time. So I hope that these discussions are rich. I hope that they develop a framework, give you some thinking space, give you some time to develop some intelligence, give you some time that you can speak authoritatively into your own life and into the world and culture. And this is the framework that's going to develop, I hope, your own personal worldview, how you see the world, society, and culture around you. So this is why the church is in trouble. I believe that we have differing of opinions on so many things and how so many things should be, so many truths that we perceive or we proclaim, so many judgments that we issue, so many cultural criticisms that we proclaim. And it has caused the church and Christianity to be galvanized and isolated and deemed irrelevant by the people around us. So I believe we can change that. I think we can make a difference. And that's why we're going to move from deconstructing to constructing a new world view. So Sheree is going to take it over for the next handful of minutes, and she is going to cover the discussion of worldviews and how many are there, what is a worldview, basically, and are there main worldviews, are there sub worldviews, what's a worldview, why are we talking about this? Sheree, take it over. Speak to me.
Do we need to define worldview first?
Yeah, do it.
Yeah. I mean, put simply, it's how you see the world, right? I think a worldview is a set of beliefs that are sometimes unconsciously held. We don't always realize that we hold these beliefs, but they work together in a mostly coherent system that all works together and makes sense together. And I say mostly because when we have those unexamined things or those unconsciously held beliefs, we can sometimes have contradictions in our system of belief that we don't realize are there. But if we're thinking about it and like purposefully trying to figure these things out, we can move towards a coherent worldview. There are lots of worldviews. depending on who you ask. There's also a lot of books written about worldviews, particularly from Christian authors, because this is a big thing in Christian thinking and trying to talk about what religions are correct and all that. When I was teaching, my senior Bible class was all on worldviews. So we did a survey for a school year. We worked through this book. Here's my show and tell. The Universe Next Door by James Sire. I still like this one. So yeah, we took a whole school year to talk about different worldviews, and now we're going to do it in, I think, 7 minutes. So
Sweet.
buckle up.
Buckle up.
Rob has a chart that we're going to put up that I think is the easiest way to visualize it. So Rob, if you could put that up, thank you. Okay. So this works from The Universe Next Door, the book I just held up, and it shows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 worldviews. And so we see those along the top of the chart. Christian theism, deism, perfect, naturalism, nihilism, existentialism, pantheism, New Age spirituality, and postmodernism. And then, if you look at the left-hand side of the chart, there's a series of 8 worldview questions. So the way James Sire sets up this idea of worldview is to take these 8 questions and look how these different frameworks would answer those questions. So question number 1 is, what is really real? Is it the spiritual world? Is it the material world? Is it both? Is it neither? And so we can see across the top how different worldviews answer that question. So within Christian theism, we would say that both spirit and matter are real. And we would say that God is the ultimate reality. As you move over one, we look at deism. God exists and God is transcendent, but God is not personal. So we start to see a shift towards the material world as being more important. If we move a column over to materialism or naturalism, this is a worldview that believes God does not exist, that believes spiritual things don't exist, that matter is the only thing that exists and ever will exist. We see that similarly with nihilism. So these 2 worldviews are the same, at least at the reality question. As we move further along into existentialism, again, we have God does not exist. Into pantheism, there's a shift to the spiritual things being what is really real. And the material world is more of an illusion. So there's a greater importance put on spirituality. We see the same thing in New Age spirituality, besides there being no belief in a personal God. And then there's postmodernism, and that is a whole other thing. And I see Tiffany's comment here. Yes, this chart is in relation to the book I just mentioned, The Universe Next Door.
So I have a question, Sharia, right in the middle of your chart here. Is New Age just the garbage dump that everyone, we just throw everything in New Age that we don't understand?
Yes and no. You'd have to read the book, Kevin. No.
Well, I haven't read the book. You just introduced it to me tonight, so not that fast of a reader.
The story of New Age spirituality is essentially God, the personal God, doesn't exist. However, if humanity would just get enlightened, then we are all gods. And we just got to do the right practices to find our divinity.
Okay.
And so you have things like manifestation, and you know, I think like folk religions could fit into that, as we're seeing resurgence of those things. But yeah, anything we don't understand really well usually gets dumped. in the New Age spirituality?
Because the New Age spirituality to me is more of a blend of Eastern
Mhm.
mysticism.
Yeah.
So we have a little bit of Hindu Buddhism coming into play, although
Mhm.
we
Oh,
can define those as we want to define them in American
yeah.
Eastern
Take
mysticism.
them out of context.
Right. If you remove a religion from its dominant
Culture.
context, yeah, then you can kind of mishmash. Like I'm not a Hindu, but I practice Hindu principles in yoga, right, or something like that. We don't necessarily uh, subscribe to the whole Hindu theology or existence. As Jake has a Buddha on his wall, or Buddha, the eightfold path of the Dharma, which I have somewhere on my shelf. Oh, it's way up there. I'll get it. The Eightfold Path of the Dharma is
Yeah.
an Eastern mysticism type idea, but then we
Mhm.
take it out of context and we just kind of turn it into a spirituality versus a practice.
Yeah.
So it kind of becomes to me like this. It's kind of like saying, well, I'm postmodern. Does that mean that you're just anything but what your dad and mom believed? I mean, I don't understand what postmodern actually means. I mean, so go ahead. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No worries. I mean, do you want to do the same thing all the way down the chart? Is there a way we can put the chart resources so people can click on it and peruse
Yeah.
out there? Okay. Oh, Kevin's gone.
Yeah. Kevin's gone.
You're muted.
Sorry, I muted myself accidentally. Tech issues all over the place. So put up the chart again, Rob, and let's look at it again.
We can put it in full view.
Well, let's
Oh,
see.
oh,
So,
yeah. We didn't go through the 8 questions on the left
oh,
hand side. We just looked at
perfect.
that first one to see how the chart worked.
Okay.
Number 1, which we looked at, is what is really real. Question number 2 asks about the nature of reality. So in this case, is the universe chaotic? Is the universe ordered? Is the universe going anywhere in particular? And how we answer that question fits within a given worldview. Question number 3 asks, what is a human being? Question number 4 asks how it's possible to know anything. How do we know what we know? Question number 5 is the meaning of history. Question number 6 is what happens after death. Question 7 is how do we know right from wrong? And it looks like question 8 isn't on this chart, so the chart might be from an old edition of the book. But question number 8 is essentially if we believe all of these things, how then are we supposed to act? What does it look like to act in light of our answers to these 7 questions?
So this is the symbol wheel of the Eightfold Path of Buddhism. Yeah. So this is the wheel.
Move it to your right a little bit.
Oops, sorry. There we go.
There we go. Perfect. Too
Okay.
far.
So this
Right,
is
there
the
you are.
eighth. There we go. The Eightfold Path of Buddhism. You'll see this. You'll see this on different images or different carvings or such. This is actually made out of sand, so I have to be very careful with it. But this is the representation. So, this sits in my house up on the top shelf of my bookcase behind me. So I guess that is New Age. I'm bringing in New Age spirituality in my house.
It's a little bit of appropriation.
I guess. But that's like hijacking, I guess, or cherry picking some idea, because that actually is a dharma. That's a practice. That's, the Eightfold Path of enlightenment. Right. Enlightenment or nirvana means to blow off and become at one with Brahma. So Brahma is the supreme God within basically the divine of all of us. And that's really where like religious worldviews become very connected. If I could just so step out of the Christian box for a moment and just maybe explicate something here, where we're all made from atoms and electrons are flowing around those protons, neutrons. Those are broken down into quarks and smaller they go. But if you begin to look at the actual matter that everything is made out of, like our phones or this piece of paper, everything is energy. Everything is space and energy moving at such a high speed that it creates a solid space or creates a solid matter. And what makes up that matter is, of course, the DNA that it's, building, if it's organic, building blocks of DNA, which makes our body and makes me different than everybody else. So we're all just a sense of vibration. We're all just a sense of like tuning forks that are being hit. So when it comes to the Hindu practices, New Age practices, there actually is some like more blue paper, probably research, but there is some sense of cohesion that when I meditate and pray, it actually does something. So that's something that I share with many religions around. Or when I practice silence, it actually does something. It does something for me. It does something for when I shut my mouth. It does something for you. So the practice that we have of meditation, prayer, silence, solitude, these things actually bring a sense of healing between people and healing between, well, even within ourselves. So I think about like New Age spirituality and where people think, oh, those people are just, wearing orange robes and, kind of crazy up on hills or something. I think that that's, really an immature kind of look at a Eastern practice, because the Eastern practices have been around for millennia, a lot longer than we have. And so when you think about the Easterns, they have a lot of, I guess, practice. They've practiced it for a long, efficacy. They've practiced it for a long time. So just to discount them into some garbage bin, I think we've done that for a long time. I think we need to stop doing that. Yeah.
I think my question from the chart and looking at all the worldviews is, do you choose your worldview? Or is it chosen for you?
That's a great question.
That is a great question. I would say
yes.
More leaning chosen for you almost.
Okay.
I think we get born into families who hold worldviews, and those things get passed to us as the way are. So unless we know to question that, then I do think it is something that's just given to us.
So you have family of origin, culture of origin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But
could you reframe your question and say your original adopted worldview or your original worldview as a child or a young adult? Some people can never break out of that for some reason. They can't choose a different thought pattern or style of life.
Is that because of access, or what do you think?
Could be. Well, I think that there's like linguistics definitely affect your worldview. Cultural access. There's a German term called Weltanschauung, Weltanschauung, that's how you pronounce it, Weltanschauung, which is like over a long period of time, your cognitive reality over a long period of time. So that like even into generations, that develops that's a wide worldview, they call it Weltanschauung.
Can't or won't? Give us a little more context there, Tiffany.
Won't change or can't change? Well,
Their worldview, yeah.
Yeah.
Can't or won't.
Yeah. Did I say can't? I probably more won't.
Belonging also play a huge role.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wanting
think
to
so.
feel part of a community is powerful, and I think a lot of us will betray ourselves and our questions for a long time before we'll call into question what the rest of the community believes.
I thinking about the question, I would say that in order to change your worldview, I almost feel like it's a place of privilege in order to change it. And not that there's any right or reason to not. And so a lot of our worldviews changes through trauma, and trauma could even be in the sense of educational epiphanies that you have to come into reconciliation with, even to trauma in your life. I wonder if that would be an interesting concept to see what is your family of origin or even your traumatic existence have to do with your outlook on the world. Probably huge.
Well, could you say something this to be true, that trauma can shape your worldview, but also be a huge wall of changing your worldview? It can shape, and you can't change it because of trauma. So if we're buried in trauma, we need outside help, counseling, therapy, such. Sometimes medication, sometimes more medical help, that we need outside influences in order to change our worldview. So if we have a certain level of trauma, that's how we see the world, is through that lens of those neural pathways of trauma. So triggers and such, all play into our perception of worldview. That I think is
I have a question, but
yeah. Oh, I was just going to say that I think that trauma plays into shaping, but also the inability to change. I think that take Tiffany and just kind of guess at what maybe she's, or what could be asked there, is if somebody is privileged, if somebody is, just privileged American citizen, and they have this very narrow-minded view of life, and they won't change. I think that's more of they won't change. Let's read her comment. I've met many people that have experienced a change or shift in worldview after higher education. Do you think this may be a part of the reason that some traditional Christians are seemingly afraid or fearful of education?
Yep.
100%.
Graduate from God.
Yeah, graduate from high school, graduate from God. That's what we used to say in youth group. Yeah, definitely. We are afraid of higher education. As Christendom all across the board, I would say that we're afraid of higher education.
In the next section, we're talking about the biblical Christian worldview, and so I'll address that a little bit deeper, of the fear that we have in even changing the worldview ourselves, or allowing other people to do so as well, because you lose the power of truth.
Yeah.
So the Dalai Lama wrote a book on negative emotions, and in that book, the focus, of course, on New Age worldview.
New Age, older than Christianity.
Yeah, New Age worldview. But Eastern mysticism would be that positive, or focusing on positive stimulus, whether that be outside or inside. The positive stimulus can begin to heal our negative stimulus, or that could be a sense of, even some medical things that they've attributed some of the practices of the Dalai Lama. So the idea of the focus, or the determination to focus on positive stimulus and rejecting negative stimulus, that in and of itself, that philosophy shapes a worldview. And so, so that would shape the worldview of how I maybe look at negative and positive things in the world. And that's what, in his book, the Dalai Lama's book on negative emotions, he does address that we just don't deny our negative emotions. It's just, what do we do with them, and how do we heal from them? But yeah, just that in and of itself can shape worldview. So knowledge in and of itself, of some higher understanding of even the divine, or even a higher consciousness of self, just the higher knowledge that we can attain can shape our worldview and change our worldview.
There's a speaker that we went to a while ago, was Jürgen Moltmann, and one of the major concepts that he was trying to get through was thinking is transcending.
Yeah.
And so through using our minds, our worldview changes. And I think even if you look at the chart, however, to put people within those categories, I don't even know if you can call it a spectrum, because I'm pretty sure my Christian biblical worldview would not match other Christians, just to put lightly, would not match a lot of Christians. And so what do you do with would they call me a deist? Would I call them New Age, because nationalism is a New Age thing?
It is a New Age thing, yeah.
And so how do we really quantify or qualify ourselves into that position is difficult.
Well, let's transition for the other 15 minutes that we have. I think that, well, if you just bring up this idea, this one Christian principle of heaven and hell, and our version of heaven and hell, and whether we think Satan is a real being, living, breathing, roaming the earth, indwelling certain people possessionally.
I might talk about this, so be careful.
Yeah. So just that idea of heaven and hell shapes a reality that drives our very being, thinking, and action with what Brene Brown would say, shame, guilt, shame, fear, anger. Lots of different things are determined out of just our view of hell and Satan. So the whole Christian idea of we need to believe in a literal Satan and a literal hell. Well, we need to really carefully think through that, because that does shape the way we think and who we're afraid of, and the devil's under every rock. So Jake, why don't you take the Christian or biblical worldview?
I think we can just say that those two are synonymous, especially people who use them to define themselves.
What two things are? Oh, yes.
It's not a biblical worldview or Christian worldview.
Yeah.
And so I think to start, the question that Barna posed, and it's George Barna, not the research group Barna, but he is the one who started it, left the organization of his own name. David Kinnaman now runs Barna, and it's different than what this article is. Yes. So just to be clear, that there is a separation there between George Barna, who wrote the article, and also Barna Group. But a question to you both: how do you determine what is right and what is wrong?
Well, whether it feels good or not.
I mean, I'm honest. I do think there's a certain amount of autopilot that comes into it, because I have
Hmm.
34 years of practice living and making decisions, and I tend to go with what I've done before and those habits.
What's worked in the past?
Yeah. Um, if I stop to think about what I'm doing, I hope that I stop long enough to filter through the lens of love.
Hmm.
And sometimes my feelings don't let me get there very quickly.
Yes, I get that.
For me, I think it's pretty simple. What's right is love, the embodiment of love and showing love to others. Love your neighbor, love yourself. And what's wrong is that which shows apathy or hate. And so if you just, okay, so I guess you can take that all the way down to the simplistic. It's wrong for me to eat ice cream every day, 24/7, or maybe it's right. We're not talking about those right and wrong choices.
Well, for you, since you're allergic to it, it definitely is a
Yeah,
wrong.
it's a wrong choice, right?
Choice.
But our choices that we make that I guess that does. I mean, pretty much everything. If I'm an existentialist, and if I'm an
Oh,
Eastern mystic, they would believe that all of our choices affect everything and everybody around us.
The butterfly effect, yeah.
Yeah, the ahimsa, which is if I even eat dairy, I'm affecting a cow.
Yeah.
So the idea of love your neighbor is a filter for me. And so what is right is loving your neighbor. What is wrong is apathy towards neighbor.
Do you feel like the Bible guides your decisions of what is right and what is wrong?
For the most part,
We're trying to get fired tonight, right? So let's just might as well do it.
I'd say for the most part for me, meaning, and what I mean by that is there's a lot of things not addressed in the Bible that I am left on my own to figure out what loving my neighbor looks like. I'm given some examples, like in the parables and Jesus's, red letters, but I'm not necessarily given every single example in my life. I mean,
Okay.
I'm almost 50,
Yeah.
so.
I would agree with that.
Sure, you're good? Okay.
These are hard questions.
Do you both believe that God is all-knowing, all-powerful, creator of the universe, who still rules that universe today?
Sometimes.
To a point.
Okay.
I'm an open theist, so I believe that God is self-limiting.
Give me a percentage.
Percentage.
I don't have a percentage.
Sometimes, like on my good days or bad days, kind of thing.
Okay.
I don't know.
It's a good response.
Yeah. Okay, that's perfect. When
Can I answer just a little more clearly? When I watch babies die, right,
Yeah.
in tragic death,
yeah,
it's hard for me to believe that God is all those omni
control.
words,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
In control. So I'm not a Calvinist. I'm an extreme open theist. So I would believe that God interjects himself when he wants, and we call upon him to do so, and he desires or she desires. So, yeah.
Okay. So when
Sometimes.
Jesus was on the earth, did Jesus live a sinless life?
Yes.
How complex was the world?
Okay. Moving forward. Satan is not just a symbol of evil, but is a real living entity.
No.
Disagree.
A person cannot earn their salvation by being good or doing good things for other people. That salvation is a free gift of God.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I agree. Yeah. Are you keeping tally?
No, I'm just here. The Bible is totally accurate in all that it teaches.
That it teaches.
Well, That's up for interpretation of how you want to
The
Yeah.
Bible
define
is
that.
totally accurate in all that it teaches.
Well, it
Prob-
teaches that we can't eat pork in the Old
Yes,
Testament.
of course. Okay.
So,
So these 6 questions are what define a biblical Christian worldview,
according to George Barna.
according to George Barna, and like he is the paramount of all Christian researchers that we have. And congratulations, we don't have a Christian worldview.
Yeah, I waffled on at least 4 of those 6.
Yeah. So 2 out of 10 Christians do whatever it feels best at the moment. 1 out of 10 Christians, in just making decisions, life decisions, take the path that is most likely to please the most people.
Mm.
Fewer than half of
Like
all
1 out-
Christians use the Bible as their guide, and the same amount the religious teaching. 2% of Christians say laws and public policy dictate their decisions. Only half of Christians believe that moral truth is absolute. 1 out of 7 Christians base their moral decisions on the Bible. And so what Barna is trying to show, even though I would disagree with the way that he came about it, is that this idea of Christian worldview is losing ground. And especially as we get into further and further away from the boomers, that we go into Gen X, Gen Z, Gen Y, whatever it is, we're losing that moral absolutism. And so I kind of want to talk about moral absolutism, and we can, I pretty much agree that Christian worldview is to enact love whenever possible. And so that's why in our intro video we talked about love being the basis on what we do, where Barna takes biblicism as the basis of Christian worldview.
Right.
And so there's these tenets of, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's a tenet of evangelicalism, which he is. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's 4 tenets of evangelicalism, and I think these actually define more of what their understanding of biblical or Christian worldview is, and it's conversionism. So this is stated this morning: the greatest gift of love that you can give another person is to save them from hell.
Yeah. I don't agree with that, but
I think hell exists, and yeah, it would be.
The accurate. What do I mean by accurate?
accurate in all its teachings. Yeah.
Yeah, the Bible is accurate.
See, that's the problem with biblical worldview, like points that we read. It's like, okay, so that is so up for interpretation, and like there's so many nuances, and to just make a blanket, what they call proposition, I don't believe in propositional faith. So I have to reject, number one, I have to reject the idea of this systematic propositional worldview.
Yeah. And so we definitely deconstruct a lot of things. And so as a culture at around the 3 of us, and so even the accurate teaching of the Bible, I mean, just look at our Exodus series, and
right. Yeah.
Who is the one teaching these accurate teachings?
Right.
And what are they trying to say with them? And do they call themselves a prophet? Then you have the next tenet of evangelicalism is biblicism, and this is what is really getting hit on hard, especially in evangelical circles right now. I am not an evangelical. I never have been. Never been a part of an evangelical movement. But because of conversionism, I would say that conversionism blocks it out. Biblicism has always been a thing, though, in most modern constructs of Christianity, that our absolute truth comes from the Bible.
Right.
One day we're going to talk about epistemology, which is the study of knowledge and how to get to truth. And I think it is a fair foreshadowing to say that absolute truth is only based on the person of God, and everything else is subject to that axiom. And so that's another day. But to say that biblicism is the basis of moral
Absolutism.
truth,
Yeah.
absolutism is rough.
So let me. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Another tenet of evangelicalism.
Crucicentrism, which is the sacrifice of Christ, and then activism, which would be loving your neighbor.
Yeah.
You even have something to say?
I just was going to say the idea of moral absolutism, where like morals don't change, right? Or they've always been the same.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was younger in ministry as a pastor, we had a younger than I am now, woman that was in a relationship with a man that she wasn't married to. And this is an embarrassing...
A sexual relationship, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is a very embarrassing part of my ministry that I regret and have a lot of, I still think about it almost on a regular basis. And she was, approached to the church, Matthew 18, people went to her, said you needed to stop this relationship and you need to quit having sex with this person. And she just declared that she wasn't going to stop. So then it was brought to a larger group of the eldership. So we sat around a table and we discussed, a bunch of, men discussed this woman's their sexual relationship, which is weird in and of itself. So we sat around a table, we discussed this, and then we brought it to the church. And in bringing it to the church, she was, quote, excommunicated or told publicly that she was anathema. She was outside of
anathemized.
Yeah, she was anathemized. So she was kicked out of the church. Now there's a lot of redemption in that relationship with me and her son, where she did come back to the church, and I was able to baptize her son on one of my last days in the church. I see that group thought that they were doing the moral thing. They were looking at her as immoral. Mm-hmm. But I look at that now and say, no, that action was immoral. That was completely immoral. What we did to her was immoral, as we deem something immoral. So I think that morality possibly is absolute. It's just we don't necessarily have, in our limited knowledge, we don't necessarily have a, access to what that morality is. And as we grow and learn and mature, we all of a sudden see what that morality is. Loving our neighbor is the moral choice.
And so I think if I could summarize that and sync it to what I was saying, because I think you're right on it. Morality, that force in even nature. I'm not talking about piety morality, but more of how to treat one another, mm-hmm. is rooted in the personality of God. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that, Kevin?
Yeah, I think that knowing the personality of God, or knowing God, And what would Jesus do, really? Really, really? I think that's the basis of our morality. And that has always been. That has never changed. And that's people's challenges today is we are so judgmental in what we deem moral or immoral. Yet the Jesus way is, for some, is very difficult to follow. It's kind of like the pastor that I heard the other day say that being trans is a myth. I think that that's an immoral statement. Like what he did right there and ostracized or isolated anybody that was in the crowd that was trans or had children or friends that were trans. That's the immorality. What would Jesus say about that? Jesus would call that person a Pharisee and get off the stage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think that what we deem morality is different than what morality actually is.
I'm not sure if I was supposed to deconstruct the Christian worldview, but I think we very much did. To look at the way that truth has come about before industrial revolution and really before scientific query, there was no need for the idea of absolute truth. And so as we moved into a realm that science became stronger and stronger, and even though the church was funding most scientific insights and advancements, there's a large contingent that rejected this because it took the power away from the centralized church, be it Catholic or Protestant. And the reaction to that for the Catholic Church was to put more emphasis and more power into the position of the Pope, where Protestantism put more power and emphasis on Scripture, that the Bible held the most absolute truth, that the Bible is key to life, that it's life's rule book. I think I've seen before.
Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff in there that I wouldn't want to live by, but that's the way that we have responded to truth being taken away from the position and authority to truth being there. And so there was this priest, his name was William of Ockham, and this is, I think, the start of all of this, all of the ideas of scientific and technological advances, but also seeing that God was not behind everything. And so if a rock was rolling down a hill, William of Ockham said that probably it just rolled down, that there was not some demon or angel pushing the rock down the hill. And so the Occam's razor, that William of Ockham was a priest, and Occam's razor is what came from William of Ockham, that the easiest and most simple answer is probably the answer. And so if you stub your toe, you probably just weren't paying attention. There's not some little demon trying to make you stub your toe. And so that's I think the difference of extreme spiritualism to biblical worldview. And then you move into modernism or structuralism. And so those are what I talked about earlier, where that's a response of truth being taken away from the position of the church to truth being put in the hands of every citizen, and so every person. And so before 357 AD, power and truth was in the position of every person. But after Constantine took the church and centralized it into a systematic religion that goes into politic, that is when it changed from being the power being from the people to now being centralized into one place. William of Ockham then changed that again. And then you get into modernism, which is how do we regain that power again? And that's through more emphasis on scripture, more emphasis on rules, more emphasis on piety, and holiness movements are birthed out of that. What was that?
I have no idea.
Then you get into, was that my it's time for me to be done? Then you get into
that's your alarm.
Yeah. Then you get into postmodernism and post-structuralism, which deconstructionism is a form of postmodernism. That we've taken the modernistic frameworks that were put in front of us and we're like, well, this isn't right. These aren't true. Power doesn't need to be centralized into inerrancy of scripture is not a thing.
Well, it is a thing, but it's a made-up thing.
A made-up thing. But so like inerrancy, like that's a really good example of what power looks like. That if you can say that something is without fault, that becomes your basis of moral understanding, where really that thing does have fault, and to not reconcile with that is hard. And so that's what postmodernism and post-structuralism does is that it attacks and it takes away the scaffolding that we have placed around our false temples of truth. Then you have the response of those things, which is what I think that we have moved into again, which is a reconstruction or a constructivism of what do we want the future to look like when we tear down these empty walls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that what you're saying is, and alluding to in a lot of ways, is just blasting through the bullcrap of like what we've been dished as Christianity. Because honestly, when I hear all of that, what I was thinking through is all of this stuff is just idol, like the making of idols. And so like when the Bible becomes like the rule of life, well, the Bible never says that the Bible is the rule of life.
It's useful.
It's useful. It's good for teaching and reproof and correction, but it's not the rule of life. Jesus is my rule of life. So I look at just the statements that are made is just idolatry. Anything that like conversion, making that like a proposition or something that is like idolized, that just is not what, needs to be the foundational building block of a worldview. So what you're saying is, as you did deconstruct, which is fine. You deconstructed the biblical worldview, which I think that's great. Now, where are we headed with all this? We're headed to constructing a new worldview. That's the point of this, is we've had this discussion, and I hope you got something out of this tonight, where you maybe bits and pieces, maybe you were left with more questions than answers, which is okay for now.
I hope you were.
And maybe you are confused about certain things, or maybe you've never heard certain things that we talked about tonight before. My hope is over the next handful of weeks that you would be able to be given the thinking space. So we've created this space for you to think and to explore these ideas with us and to ask questions, and maybe, there's no bad ideas, no bad questions out there. There's sometimes, not so good responses, but just asking a question is a good idea. So where we're headed next week is we are headed right into the first development, according to Leo Apostle, the atheist, who's going to develop our framework of worldview, turning it into a real biblical worldview, I guess, where we're going to take an honest look at the world, a real honest look at the world and what that looks like, and how do we take an honest look at the world around us. That's next week's topic. So that's all the time we have for now. And thanks everybody for joining us. I appreciate our co-hosts tonight, Sharia and Jake. Thank you for joining us and all of your input and your research and your study for this tonight. And next week we will be here, same time, same place, Thursday at 8 o'clock. We hope that you join us and come with your questions. Maybe you can think all week about what we talked about and then write some things in the chat and we can answer those as we go along. So have a wonderful evening and good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.